It was a rainy morning when the entire small town gathered in front of the old gymnasium covered with rusty tiles, the echo of the rain mixing with the murmurs of the crowd that anxiously awaited the most insane challenge ever proposed. A single trainer, known for his almost cruel discipline, for the hardness in his gaze, and for his reputation of never having lost an endurance fight, would face 30 obese men who carried not only the weight of their bodies, but also the weight of lives marked by contempt, by humiliation, and by the silent pain of never being taken seriously. And this clash was not only physical, but also psychological, because with every step taken, every drop of sweat shed, there was a story of rejection, of cruel laughter in schools, of closed doors at job interviews, of disdainful looks on the streets. And now all of that had turned into accumulated rage, ready to explode against that trainer who represented discipline, rigidity, and the judgment of the entire world. The silence broke when a whistle blew and the trainer, with tense muscles and a firm gaze, advanced alone against a sea of heavy bodies that roared like a storm of fury. The ground trembled beneath the synchronized steps of 30 men who were no longer just isolated individuals, but single mass, moved by pain and by the need to prove that they were more than numbers on a scale. The trainer dodged with feline agility. Dry punches struck flesh, but each impact seemed only to irritate his opponents even more. He breathed deeply, felt his lungs burn, but kept his mind cold, because he knew he was not fighting just 30 bodies, but 30 life stories. And each face that appeared before him revealed tears mixed with sweat, clenched teeth, memories of mothers crying for excluded sons, of fathers who had stopped believing in them. And yet the trainer did not retreat. Even when the pain in his arms became unbearable, even when blood trickled in discreet streams under the white shirt that was no longer white, he screamed from within, not only for himself, but out of the belief that winning that challenge was also proving that anyone could be forged in the fire of discipline. But the 30 did not stop. They fell and rose like waves of a furious ocean, and with every fall came more rage, more hatred, more despair, until the screams of the crowd began to sound like war chants. Some cried out for the fall of the trainer, others for his almost superhuman resistance. At that moment, the fight ceased to be merely a spectacle, becoming a living metaphor of the war between judgment and acceptance, between rigidity and the pain of existence. The trainer felt his eyes fill with tears, not of weakness, but of realizing the abyss that separated those men from a world. He understood that every punch he delivered did not strike only flesh, but memories. Every defense was not just a technical gesture, but a silent message that life always hits harder. And when time seemed to stretch, when the heart beat like a deafening drum, he felt his knees surrounded by the 30, not in defeat, but in surrender. He looked at each sweaty face marked by pain and rage, and raised his hands not to give up, but to show that he had understood. And in that instant, the entire gym held its breath, for the battle was no longer about winning or losing, but about seeing one another. The 30 stopped, gasping, some in tears, unable to continue beating someone who finally saw them not as enemies or numbers, but as wounded human beings. And in that heavy silence, the trainer said only that their true fight was not against him, but against a life that crushed them daily, and that if they accepted to fight themselves, they could change everything. They could turn every tear into fuel, every wound into strength, every humiliation into victory. And it was at that instant that the crowd erupted in thunderous applause, not because it was a clear winner, but because they had witnessed something rare, the transformation of a brutal combat into collective catharsis, the revelation that deep down we all carry invisible weights. We all face battles that no one sees, and that sometimes it takes an absurd war like that to remember that even the toughest of men can cry, and even the most rejected can be seen. The trainer rose with difficulty, his body throbbing with pain, but with a tired smile, and the 30 gathered around him, not as adversaries, but as companions in a fight they would never forget. And so, on that rainy morning, a legend was born that would echo forever, not as a story of a trainer who faced 30 fat men, but as a memory that when suffering meets courage, even the impossible can become redemption. But what seemed like a redemptive ending revealed itself to be only the beginning of an even darker descent, because that night, after the gymnasium was emptied and the lights were turned off, each of the 30 went back home, carrying not only the sweat and physical pain of the battle, but a multiplied emotional weight. For when the catharsis of the crowd vanished and the cold silence of the midnight hours took over, Each man found himself face to face with his own reflection in the mirror, and what they found was not immediate hope, but a crushing emptiness that screamed memories of old defeats. The trainer, though wounded, could not sleep. The muscles throbbed, but it was a heart that bled, for he understood he had stirred wounds far too deep, and that each one of those men now stood at the edge of an inner abyss. And so, days later, disturbing news began to appear. One of them disappeared without leaving a trace. Another was found unconscious among pills scattered across the floor. Another ended a violent crisis at home, breaking furniture as if fighting invisible ghosts. And the trainer, tormented, felt responsible, as if by challenging the 30 he had opened a box of demons he did not know how to close. He tried to seek them out, knocked on doors, offered help, but not all accepted. Some spat on the ground, saying the fight had only reinforced the hatred they felt toward themselves. Others wept in silence, begging to be trained not in the body, but in the soul. And it was then the trainer understood that his battle was not against muscles and weight, but against the darkness the world had planted in the minds of those men. He gathered those willing to return, took them outdoor training under rain and sun, made each one face their limits, made every tear fall like a purifying scourge. But the shadow did not disappear, because with every progress came brutal relapses, anxiety attacks, bursts of rage, sleepless nights. And the deeper the trainer plunged into that hell, the more he realized he too was falling apart. The once unshakable body now trembled. His eyes burned from insomnia. The discipline he so preached no longer enough to sustain his own sanity. He began having constant nightmares in which the 30, deformed and monstrous, came to crush him in the dark. He woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, with the sensation of suffocation, until one stormy night, unable to bear the pressure, he rose from bed, went to the mirror, stared at his own face marked by bruises that seemed eternal, and cried as he had never cried before, because he understood that perhaps there would never be victory. Perhaps the fight was eternal. Perhaps he had awakened something he could never control. But in that deep weeping, a new determination was also born. Not the determination to win, but to endure alongside them, to abandon no one, even if it meant losing himself in the process. And so, the trainer began visiting each of the 30 weekly, facing destroyed families, ruined houses, empty gazes. In each visit he offered not promises, but presence, not speeches of strength, but silence heavy with understanding. Slowly, some began to change. One returned to walking alone at dawn. Another enrolled in the course for the first time in years. Another reunited with the father he hadn't seen since adolescence. But at the same time, others sank deeper and deeper. 2 ended up hospitalized in clinics. 1 disappeared forever. And the story that had begun as an insane spectacle now became a collective drama no one dared ignore. The town talked. Newspapers from outside came to report. Headlines read, "The trainer who challenged 30 and changed destinies." But no one knew the whole truth. No one saw the hidden tears, the cuts on wrists disguised, the muffled screams in the pillows at night. No one realized that the war had never ended, only changed form, and that deep down they were all trapped inside an invisible battlefield, where each day was a fight to survive the very weight of life itself. And so the legend grew, but now not as a story of strength, but as a chronicle of pain and hope intertwined. And each person who heard that story asked themselves in silence whether they would have the courage to face not 30 men, but their own ghosts, because in the end, the true war had always been inside each one. As the months passed, what once seemed like only a symbolic battle turned into a silent movement that consumed the entire town, because the 30 men were no longer just isolated individuals trying to survive. Now they were part of something greater, a living experiment of pain, downfall, and resistance, led by a trainer who no longer recognized himself. His hardened muscles were covered in scars, his sunken eyes betrayed sleepless nights, and his voice, once implacable and firm, now trembled as if every word were being torn from the abyss. Yet still he carried on. Still he gathered those who remained and made them run under violent rains, drag tires through muddy fields, scream until their voices broke. And with each passing day, this ritual edged closer to madness, because there was something beyond physical training, a desperate attempt to purge the inner demons devouring each of them. The town that once applauded now watched with fear, because at night they could hear screams coming from the abandoned fields where they trained, sounds not of mere effort but of pure despair. as if exorcisms were being performed. And amid this maddening process, rumors began to spread that some of the 30 were turning into something else. Some said they were growing stronger. Others claimed they were losing their minds. And one of them, in a fit of fury, destroyed an entire bar by himself. The newspapers called it crime, but those present swore they saw something in his eyes, as if it was a materialization of all the pent-up hatred exploding at once. The trainer grew desperate, feeling he was losing control, but he did not stop, because deep inside he believed that if he stopped, they would all fall into the abyss at once. And then came the day when the 30 decided to confront him again, not in a spectacle for crowd, but in a secret pact in the same rusted gymnasium where it had all begun. This time there was no audience, no applause, only silence and the creaking of the wind passing through the cracks. They formed a circle around him, each face marked by new scars, gazes heavier, bodies still awkward but filled with raw strength. And the trainer, even exhausted, stepped into the center without hesitation, because he knew that moment would define everything, whether he would fall as a broken man or endure as an eternal symbol. And when the first of them advanced, it was not a physical blow but a torn scream of pain, followed by another and another, until the entire gymnasium erupted in desperate cries, as if 30 souls were breaking free from centuries of invisible imprisonment. The trainer fell to his knees, brought his hands to his head, and wept with them, because he understood that this fight was no longer against him. It was against the world, against every wound left by a society that had never accepted them. And in that chaos of tears, fists pounding the floor, blood dripping from noses and hands, something happened. An abrupt silence took hold, as if time had stopped. They all looked at each other for the first time without masks, without hatred, without fear. Only broken men trying to find meaning. And the trainer, with a hoarse voice, said that there, in that circle of pain, they could die as enemies or be reborn as brothers. And that phrase felt like a divine sentence, because one by one, the 30 stepped forward, placed their hands on his shoulders and on each other's, forming an imperfect but unbreakable chain. And what had begun as an insane challenge became, in that instant, a kind of blood pact, a promise that from then on they would no longer be alone, no longer 30 against one, but 31 against the world. And this secret pact was never revealed in detail, but echoed in the years that followed like a chilling whisper, because those who saw the 30 walking together through the streets after that night swore there was something different about them, something heavy, something sacred, and at the same time dangerous, as if they carried in every step the memory of having once been in hell and returned alive. After that night in the gymnasium, the town was never the same again, because something had changed in the essence of those men. Something no one could explain. The pact that had bound the trainer, and the 30 grew like a hidden flame that began to set everything around it on fire. They were no longer seen as fragile, isolated individuals. Now they walked together in silence, filling narrow sidewalks like a human wall, and every glance they cast carried an intensity that made strangers avert their eyes. There was an aura of brotherhood and menace that frightened and attracted at the same time, to the point where rumors began to spread that the group had turned into a secret sect, a kind of army of pain, led by a trainer who was no longer just a physical instructor, but almost a prophet of resistance. And it was impossible to deny that the training had become rituals. When they ran at dawn under the pale moon, their shouts echoed like war chants. When they dragged chains across the asphalt, the metallic clatter sounded like battle drums. And when they gathered around bonfires in empty lots, the flames reflected in their sweaty, exhausted faces as if they were warriors from a lost age. In this atmosphere, the town was divided between fear and admiration. Some said they were finally finding strength and purpose, while others swore they were being consumed by a collective madness. The truth was that both sides were right, because within that group there was progress and destruction side by side. Some lost weight, their eyes changed, their self-esteem was reborn. But others grew violent, unable to control the fury now unleashed after years of being repressed. Soon incidents followed. One of them beat a man who had mocked his appearance in the past. Another shattered shop windows of stores that had once expelled him. And though the trainer tried to keep control, he felt that the pact he had created was no longer in his hands. It was as if he had awakened a collective monster, an entity formed by 30 human wounds, now walking through the world demanding recognition. The police began to watch them. Reporters tried to extract their secrets, But all failed, because the 30 spoke to no strangers, only to each other and to the trainer. That silence made them even more feared. Until one night, in an improvised protest in front of City Hall, the 30 appeared together, shoulder to shoulder, like a living wall, staring down the authorities without saying a single word. And that silence was more disturbing than any scream, because it seemed to announce that they were willing to challenge everything. The trainer, though present, no longer led with orders. He only walked among them like a weary guide, aware that he had created something greater than himself. And amid the rising chaos, symbols began to emerge. Identical tattoos on their arms, voluntary scars made during extreme training sessions, marks that united each of them like soldiers of an invisible war. Slowly, the 30 ceased to be merely obese men trying to prove themselves. They became a living legend, whispered about as the mark to the gym, and the town no longer dared to laugh, because every time they crossed paths with the group, they felt a chill, as if standing before a force born from humiliation, but now walking as an army that carried on its skin the memory of suffering and the promise of never again being ignored. At that point, the trainer no longer knew if he'd saved those men or condemned them, because although they were stronger, more united, and more feared, they carried in their eyes a shadow of something that could explode at any moment. And he understood in silence that perhaps the true climax was still to come, because no one awakens a hatred of the whole world without the world one day deciding to strike back.